Good evening, everybody. My name's Gaby Ritchie. I'm the program director at Inyathelo, and on behalf of Inyathelo, I would like to extend a really warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We are very excited after quite a long process of development to be able to launch a very special report this evening, Student Access and Success, Issues and Interventions in South African Universities. So thank you for joining us. Some people are local and some people have come from very far. In particular, I think the guest who has probably come the furthest and to whom I'd like to extend a very special welcome is Bill Moses, Program Director in the education field at the Kresge Foundation, who has come from Detroit for a series of meetings and events this week, and is here this evening to share with us a little bit about the Kresge Foundation's interest in and interventions around higher education in South Africa. So I'm going to hand straight over to Bill. Bill?
Thank you, Gaby. Before I begin, I'd like to just thank everyone at Inyathelo who helped get this report finished and make this event possible. That includes, of course, Gaby Ritchie, Sheila Gastro, and Ludina Churi, and everyone at Inyathelo. I'd also, of course, like to thank Tandi Lewin and Monica Mawayo, who are the two authors of the report. The Kresge Foundation is a U.S.-based foundation. We are headquartered in Detroit, Michigan. We're a private foundation that supports opportunity for low-income people in cities. We have 6 divisions, including education. Both in the United States and in South Africa, we try to promote access and success for low-income, first-generation, and underrepresented students. We have 2 main avenues to do that. First, we try to help students get into and through university by helping to build university-going culture, helping students apply to university, help them access financial aid, and then once they get to university, get to the heart of the matter, the most important, which is to actually succeed, to persist to graduation, and then to get a job that can support them and their families. We also try to support and build the capacity of institutions that focus on low-income, first-generation, and underrepresented students. In the United States, that's primarily community colleges and minority-serving institutions. And in South Africa, we see all 25 of the universities as fulfilling that function to greater or lesser extent. I wanted just to tell you why we work in South Africa. I think for most Americans, South Africa really is a beacon of hope. It's been 20 years since the democratic elections, and for people who were in South Africa 20 years ago, who were able to vote or watch the voting, it was not a guaranteed thing. And I think I know that South Africa has its challenges, but despite all the challenges that your country faces, it is really a remarkable example of what people can do when they're given an opportunity to try to make a just and equitable society. We think, though, that in order for that to succeed, you do need a well-educated society. And we've seen some real successes in higher education in South Africa since 1994. Basically, about twice as many students are now in the post-secondary system, which is wonderful. You can read the white paper that was released last December to get all the details and statistics. It's available on the DHET website. But of course, one of the challenges is that when you look at those numbers, the percentage of students graduating has not really changed much. So there are more students going through, more students graduating, but the percentages have not improved much. So the question is why is that? There's been at least 30 years of institutions focusing on academic development and access and success programs. And so I think the reason why this report is so valuable to the discussion is to take a snapshot and a look back and say, what are the challenges? What does work? Why are things not necessarily working as they should? And so we're delighted with the product that Tandi and Monica have come up with. So I'd like to thank her very much for that. Let me tell you a little bit about Tandi Lewin if you don't know her, but I think most of you do. Tandi has a BA from UCT, a master's from the University of London, and is working on her PhD from the University of the Free State. I'm proud to say that UCT and actually all 3 institutions are either current or former Kresge grantees. She has also worked for the Department of Education as the Chief Director for Equity and University Policy. She was a consultant for the Ford Foundation, which is where I first got to know Tandi, and she now works for the JET Education Services as an executive manager in monitoring and evaluation. She has, as I said, done a terrific job with this report, and I welcome her to the dais.
Thank you, Bill. Am I taller than you? That's fine. Friends and colleagues, I've presented this report a few times within our research advisory group meeting, and I always start with apologies. So I decided this time I'm going to start by trying to focus on why I think this report is useful, or why I hope it will be useful. We wanted to provide a picture, as Bill has already said, of what's actually going on in the system at the moment to support student success. And the idea was to provide a very general overview to support Kresge's planning around grant making in this area. So we had to make decisions about where to focus because it's a very broad field. And we focused primarily on the work taking place in the academic development field. The field is broadly defined here, working on a range of areas from professional development of academic staff to curriculum development, technology and education, and the report gives you a picture of the very, very wide range of work that takes place under the umbrella of academic development. But we also looked a little bit at, partly because of Kresge's interest in data issues and institutional planning and research, we did interview some people who are working in that area. So there's a little bit of emphasis on that as well. I think hopefully what the report will be useful for is to provide a general overview of what's happening in the sector. It's very much at a particular moment in time. Things change very fast. So, well, things change fast, but also some things haven't changed at all since I was a student. So it's a very interesting field. As Bill said, there's been work in this area for over 30 years. And so many of the things we talk about we've known about for a very long time, and some of them haven't shifted at all. Others have. But what we wanted to do was to trace at the policy level as well as at institutional level what's going on. So if you get to see the report, I refer you to a conceptual framework that we set out. It's on page 42 of the report. I should have asked them to put it up here, but basically it gives you a sense of how we understand access and success issues. And basically they are extremely complex, multidimensional. They are both social issues and institutional issues, and many of them are cross-sectoral as well. And in the report, we address non-academic issues and academic issues separately. But really, that's just for report writing. It's just for report writing purposes because we recognize and acknowledge that they are deeply interconnected, whether you're talking about academic or non-academic issues. But you will see in the report the greater focus is on academic matters, and that reflects the people that we talk to, but it also reflects where we think the emphasis needs to be placed. So South Africa's success rates in higher education are low, and they've been recognized as systemic, and they're rooted in the schooling sector, in which I'm now working. The CHE report, which a number of people here were involved in writing and working on, that came out last year, proposing curriculum reform, describes the problem as an articulation gap, which results in underperformance. So only about half of undergraduates entering higher education are actually completing their degrees. We like the term articulation gap, and we use it in the report. It's very useful, I think, for many reasons. I think it begins to move us away from the ideas of deficit students and benchmark students. It begins to allow for critical examination of how the university sector itself, despite the slow pace of change in the schooling sector, might itself shift to change historical patterns of performance and university participation. So I want to advocate for the use of the term, but also I think improving access and success is, in our view, and it's expressed really very strongly through the majority of the participants in the study, as a social justice issue. It's fundamentally an issue of social justice, and I think it's important to hold on to this in an environment where universities are facing myriad pressures. And I'm not going to go into analysis of neoliberalism and everything, because then you're going to ask me questions about that, and I shall refer them into the audience. But I think that this is a report from the CHE report, and it says that the poor performance patterns cannot be attributed simply to student deficits or poor teaching, and they will not change spontaneously. Moreover, it cannot in any simple way be attributed to affective and material factors, Similar or worse conditions are present in other sub-Saharan African countries without such poor outcomes. Rather, the indications are that the underperformance must be systemic in origin. So given the audience here, which I understand is comprised of those who have quite a deep understanding of student success issues, maybe not everyone, so forgive me if I'm talking to a certain group, but I wanted to focus rather on the recommendations and findings than sort of give you the detail about what's actually going on in universities. It's there in the report. But I did want to say something about the constraints, and these are specifically constraints to academic development work. And one of them relates to the staffing, resourcing, and the intellectual development of teaching and learning work. The other is the appropriateness of teaching infrastructure, curriculum structure, and development, which is addressed in the report that I've mentioned earlier. The ways in which institutions use data and conduct research for planning purposes. And then the final one is a complex set of issues relating to attitudes towards teaching and the status of teaching and learning, which are linked to both leadership and structure in institutions. And that's kind of where the report focuses in the end. And we come up with a number of priority areas, which I think might be put up on the board at some stage. But the first one, and we put it first deliberately, is about enhancing the status of teaching and learning in universities. And I think, this is not a new thing for those people who are working in the field, but maybe it's a shift that needs to take place. We found this to be a very common theme coming up in all our interviews. There needs to be greater reward and recognition for teaching. There needs to be better balance in universities between the rewards for teaching and research, specifically in the South African context, because poor student performance is a mainstream issue and not a marginal issue. And this is argued quite eloquently in a number of reports that we reference in our own report. Supporting the scholarship of teaching and learning is also another area. These are all very broad fields. I'm not going to go into them in detail. Improving curriculum development and teaching practice, using technology to support teaching, of which there's a great deal going on in the sector, but it's highly uneven, and possibly it's a huge area for development. Building data and research capacity, as I've mentioned. There's a strong focus on greater evidence-based decision-making. Even the CHE study that I described was based on data, cohort data from the 2005, 2006 entering students, but I now believe the department is going to have the ability to do cohort studies on an annual basis and drill down to courses and institutions. So that capacity is growing enormously and will allow us to really try and understand the problems in more depth. Improving infrastructure for teaching and learning, there's a great deal going on in the institutions, but it's still a very big issue. Most people working in the sector will tell you that greater face-to-face time between lecturing staff and students is key to improving student performance. So a lot of universities are working on how they can build that greater face-to-face time. And there are a number of innovations that we describe in the report. Growing a new generation of academic development professionals is a sector-wide problem around getting new academics into the system. And part of that is also what has been a very unstable group of people who haven't had stable funding in the academic development field. There's a great need to work on that. And then there's an issue around addressing institutional integration. Traditionally, the whole area of student affairs and academic support, academic development have been quite separated, and remarkably still, in many cases, still very separate. And so but there are instances where universities are looking at students more holistically and working out ways in which they can integrate those kinds of work. So, and issues of student finance, how students live, where they live and what their living conditions are, what the social context of their learning environment is, are profoundly important for student access and success. And we do address them in the report. But I think it's of surprise for us was still that this silo approach still exists. There's a quote from the report from one of our interviewees. I'm not sure if she's here. Unless you get the whole package in order, you can work with teaching and learning. But if students are hungry, the places they're sleeping in are dangerous, and they can't study at night, how do you address such a problem? So it's how you get the whole lot of an institution, the Registrar's Division, the NSFAS, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, the people giving financial aid, and the people in the residences. How do you get all of that to talk to each other to support the teaching and learning enterprise? So having said that, the major and the core finding of this report is that the fundamental issue requiring attention within the university system is the quality and status of teaching and learning. And this is not a new idea for those working in the academic development, teaching and learning field, but there is evidence that it's still not a mainstream issue, despite poor student performance being a mainstream issue. And improving teaching and learning will really require a lot of things, including ensuring adequate staffing, resourcing and intellectual development, supporting the scholarship of teaching and learning, much greater understanding of the challenges in academic development, and the innovation in teaching has happened, but there's still a lot more work to be done. And then considering curriculum change, which is something that the CHE report has proposed. You're probably going to work out which side of the fence I am on that, but it doesn't really matter what I think. I think it matters what the DHET thinks. So I think what's interesting from the report is that each institution is very different in the attention and support it provides for teaching development. There's some really exciting initiatives in overall, but there are also some really, really quite depressing places as well. So there needs to be greater focus on all of those. And I think while I've said that there are practical shifts necessary, and there's evidence that this is beginning to happen, there's also evidence that there's a need for a discursive, conceptual shift. Understanding learning in higher education as a socio-cultural context issue goes some way to understanding the complexity of addressing academic success. So Chrissy Bowie has written quite a lot about this, about how the discursive understandings around academic support and academic development have changed over time, but also that they coexist. And I think we're still in a moment where some of those discourses are still coexisting. So the idea about deficit students, or the idea about teaching to a benchmark student who's an ideal that isn't actually based on who the real students are studying in our system, has to change. And it has to change at every level, and it's not a simple matter. So having said that we need that, I think that the report found that actually there's quite a lot of hope in the sector. There's a renewed focus on student epistemological access and success at the level of policy, so recognizing the importance of teaching it in higher education. So the CHE's program on quality enhancement, the fact that the DHET, which has been putting funding into supporting teaching for a very long time, but is also refocusing that funding to address some of the challenges in the academic development field, like, for example, the need for funding over a 3-year period rather than kind of short-term funding. State funding came through is very important in this, that everyone who works in the academic development field said state funding was absolutely essential to the work that had been done. The CHE's proposal for undergraduate curriculum development and reform, and also the setting up of a new directorate in the DHET, which is going to focus on teaching and learning in higher education, in tandem with the focus on teaching in schools and teaching in the FET sector, and people involved in that are here, if you want to talk to them. So there's very exciting things going on. There's the chair of teaching and learning in higher education at one of the universities. And then there's all the data improvement stuff, like the department's ability to do cohort studies. So I think there is more intentionality, which is everyone who knows him is going to know who used that word, but we put it in our report. There is a need for greater intentionality around this, and I think we saw evidence of that starting to happen. That there's a backup from policy, from funding, and from monitoring, and there's also stronger articulation in the sector. Whether curriculum reform itself is possible remains a question to be explored within the sector, particularly whether the staffing capacity exists for such curriculum reform as been proposed. But I think all these initiatives are part of a broader recognition of the centrality of teaching and learning to improve the overall performance of the system and success for individual students. Some institutions, as I said, are very dynamic, others are quite depressing, but the challenge is to get it working across the system. And I'm very excited that Kresge is funding some of these initiatives and is interested in funding in this area. It's complex, but it's really the area that we need to move in. So thank you. I don't know how much time I took. I wanted to thank Ludine, who supported us on the project, and Melanie, who's not here. She's in Finland, but who ran the project, Gaby and Sheila, who inputted into the project. All the other people at Inyathelo have helped. The research advisory group, many of whom are here, who gave us a lot of support. And also those of you who were interviewed for the study, also many of you whom are here, thank you very much. I also want to thank Christy, who edited the report. And thanks very much for letting us do this work. And I really hope that it's a useful report, and I hope that Inyathelo will distribute it widely. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, please have some more food and some drinks and chat to each other. So it's a really useful report, and of course we hope that it helps to inform the work going forward. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Tandi. Have a good evening.